So you now agreed to be in the recording. Juan各位中国朋友, e bem-vindas e bem-vindos aos nossos amigos brasileiros, and a warm welcome to all of you participating from around the globe in this collaborative event from the University of Campinas and the institutions of the Chinese Academy of Science of China, CAS. My name is Niklas Weins, Ni Kai-sung, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Environment and Society program of the University of Campinas, and currently a visiting researcher at the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands. My dear colleague, Dr. Liu Si, is one of Unicampi's most recent graduates in the research line Brazil-China relations of the graduate program in social sciences, and currently a researcher with the Institutes of Science and Development, ISD, of CAS, where two of our invited speakers are from today. Together, we have invited 5 distinguished speakers about 2 important topics of climate change and biodiversity policy, and hope for an exciting debate this week in which COP15 is kicking off in Kunming in Yunnan, China, and the COP26 in Glasgow is just around the corner. So I'll hand over to my colleague Liu Si now for the introduction.
Okay. Thank you, Nicholas. Welcome, bienvenidos, and 欢迎大家参加今天的研讨会. So this roundtable will be moderated by Fabiana Barbie, a postdoctoral researcher at our Center for Environmental Studies and Research, who works on local climate change policies, mitigation and adaptation strategies.
I think we lost C.
I think we have a little problem with her.
Yes, something might went wrong with her network.
Okay, maybe I'm going to continue introducing Fabiana Barbie then. So she's a postdoctoral researcher at our Center for Environmental Studies and Research, and has been working on climate change policies, mitigation, adaptation strategies in Brazil, in Brazilian cities mainly. She is a sociologist and holds a PhD in environment and society, and has been a visiting researcher at San Francisco State University in the US, at York University in Canada, and at Fudan University in China already. So then I will hand over to Fabiana for the moderation of the event. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you, Ni hao. Hola, hello everyone. Thanks a lot to Nicholas C for this introduction and for organizing this roundtable with such distinguished experts from China and Brazil. And thank you all for being here with us today. Our objective today is to discuss the current state, the challenges and the perspectives of 2 of humanity's greatest challenges in this century: climate change and biodiversity loss in China and in Brazil, in a crucial moment for global environmental governance, as Nicholas said, with both climate and biodiversity conferences on the way. So our roundtable is divided in 3 parts. In the first part, we'll have Professors Gu Baihe, Professor Leila da Costa Ferreira, and Professor Wang Pu, talking about climate strategies in China and Brazil. And then we'll have some space for discussion. In the second part, we'll have Professor Carlos Joly and Professor Zhang Yang talking about biodiversity in Brazil and China. And finally, we'll have some time for the debate with the questions from the audience. So we're really looking forward to a great discussion. The speakers have 15 minutes, so we have time for more questions and more debate at the end. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Gu Baihe. I'm sorry about my pronunciation. I tried to take some tips from Nicholas. Well, Professor Gu is an associate researcher at the Institute of Sciences and Development at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He's mainly engaged in research on China's climate change and low carbon transition strategies, plans and policies, and also conducted some relevant research regarding the South-South cooperation strategy for climate change. the climate change impacts and adaptation strategies among the major economies of the Belt and Road Initiative, nature-based solutions, and global climate governance countermeasures. His research has provided support for the dual carbon targets of China, the China-US Joint Presidential Statement on Climate Change, the Paris Climate Negotiations, and low carbon development goals and roadmaps. Welcome, Professor Gu Baihe. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Fabiana. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, I'll share my screen.
Okay.
Okay. Is it okay?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. Okay. Now, thank you, Professor Fabiana. Thank you for your introduction. Good morning and good evening, everyone. I'm Gu Baihe from CSSD. Thank you for inviting me to attend this meeting. I think it's very meaningful to hold this meeting during the Biodiversity COP25, and also the Climate COP26 will launch in half a month. I do some research on the climate policy. So today I will try to introduce the Chinese dual carbon policies and also the expectations of China for COP26. Okay, I'll introduce the. Sorry. Okay, I will introduce from three aspects: the climate urgency, climate progress, and the challenge in addressing climate change in China, and finally the expectation of China for COP26. Okay, since I think maybe all the people in the meeting know a lot about climate change, so I will introduce this part simply. Climate change is currently one of the most serious challenges around the world. According to the IPCC AR6 Work Group 1, each of the last 4 decades has been warmer than any of the previous ones. And according to the SSPs set by AR6, a temporary rise of 1.5 degree is still possible in 2021 to 2040, and 2 degree in the medium term if strong emission reductions are not made. So climate change is becoming more and more urgent, and the global carbon budget space is getting tighter. To achieve the temperature control target of the Paris Agreement, we need to take rapid and drastic actions to reduce emissions and achieve net zero emissions as soon as possible. Until now, major countries have set strong mid and long-term carbon reduction targets. Almost 60 countries have clearly stated their carbon neutrality targets. For the EU, UK, Germany, USA, China, and Brazil, almost all the main economies. I think for the I think these ambitious goals will strongly support the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Okay, now that's the key point. Let's look at the progress and challenge in addressing climate change in China. On September 26 last year, President Xi Jinping announced at the general debate of 75th sessions of the UN General Assembly that China would strive to peak CO2 emissions by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. Since then, President Xi has made more than 20 speeches on carbon peaking and carbon neutrality, attaching great importance to the implementation of dual carbon targets. Okay, this slide shows China's goals and pathways to address climate change. I think most of you know about that. I will not read the numbers. Okay, then now let's see progress of the dual carbon pledge since last year. First one, the CPC Central Committee and the State Council has held many meetings to deploy the dual carbon targets into the overall layout of social economy development and ecological civilization construction. The 14th five-year plan makes some change of the industrial and energy structures in the next 5 to 15 years to strengthen the overall green transition. And the leading organization of the dual carbon affairs changed from MEE to NDRC, who has stronger management and deploy capacity, and set up the leading group on the dual carbon targets. In July this year, the national carbon market officially started online trading, covering more than 2,000 thermal power companies, making it the largest carbon market in the world. And the steel, non-ferrous, petrochemical, and other industries will also be included in the national carbon market one after another, I think, during the 14th five-year plan. After introduction, the dual carbon targets, two extreme approaches have emerged in some provinces and enterprises in China. One is to climb the peak of carbon emission, and the other proposed unrealistically high carbon reduction targets. In order to solve these problems, China's central government has made timely proposals to ensure the whole country works together for achieving the dual carbon targets, correct the campaign-style carbon reduction, establish first and then break, and resolute curb the development of the pollution-intensive and energy-intensive industries. And on September 22, 1 year after the dual carbon targets was proposed, China renews its commitment as the UN General Assembly to stop the construction of new overseas coal power plants. And I think instead they will support the green and low carbon energy transition in developing countries. At present, the 1+N policy system for the dual carbon target is being formulated and released one after another. The one means the guiding policy document of China's dual carbon work. The name maybe is the guidance for achieving the dual carbon targets, which will be released soon. Provides the overall plan for China's dual carbon work in the near, mid, and long term. And the N means carbon neutrality plans for various sectors and areas, which will be introduced one after another this year and early next year. These policy documents will guide China's green and low carbon transition, which will cover almost all areas of economy and social development, including a green low carbon circular economy system, clean low carbon safe and efficient energy system, green low carbon transition system, and urban and rural construction, low carbon composition, and international cooperation, and so on. Okay, in addition, various ministries and local governments have made positive feedback, and relevant policy documents have been issued one after another. Okay, as a result, China has accomplished all of its 2020 emission reduction targets. But for the 2030 emission peaking and the 2060 carbon neutrality goals, there are lots of obstacles. Firstly, China's transition periods from carbon peak to carbon neutrality is very short. From carbon peak to neutrality, EU has 50 to 70 years, and the USA will take more than 40 years. But for China, there are only 30 years. Secondly, China's per capita income level is relatively low compared with the developed countries when they achieved carbon peak. Developed countries per capita income was around 20,000 to 25,000 at time of carbon peak. For China, now the per capita income has just exceeded $10,000. That means when carbon peaking, the per capita income of China will be less than $15,000. The third one is the unbalance of China's regional economy and the social development. From the perspective of carbon emissions, the increase of carbon emission in the relative developed eastern countries is limited. Although these regions have strong carbon emission reduction capacity, there is still an impulse to invest in carbon-intensive projects under the pressure of economy recovery. In construct, carbon emission in the central and the western regions still have some room for growth, and it's more difficult to reach the peak in the short term, especially in the fossil energy-rich provinces. For example, Shanxi, Inner Mongolia. And carbon neutrality will have a huge impact on the economy development and employment in these regions. The last one is the technology. In China, many sectors and industries are making dual carbon plans. At first, the experts believe that the industry sector will reach the targets earlier. But after carefully evaluation, they found the industry sector may be the most difficult sector to achieve carbon neutrality, because a lot of key technologies such as hydrogen, steel making, CCUS, process re-engineering of cement industry, and so on. Okay. In the current situation about the increasingly complex international situation, okay, let's imagine what's the expectation of China for COP26. On the domestic side, we should pay attention on how to correctly handle the relationship between mid and the long-term green transition and steady short-term economic growth. For the dual carbon targets, China will pay more attention on the implementation of dual carbon targets instead of proposing more and more higher targets. On the international side, China will always adhere to the Paris Agreement, which means China will work together with other countries to ensure the realization of the 2-degree goal, and continue to promote the cooperation in carbon emission reduction through market mechanism, especially the Article 6 of Paris Agreement. China will continue to promote the climate finance assistance from developed countries and transfer and cooperation of low carbon and decarbonized technology. Here I made a list of possible consensus and disagreements of COP26. In terms of consensus, I think most countries will agree on promoting synergies in tackling climate change and biodiversity protection, promoting the green recovery of the global economy, expand the international investment and financing, and for the just transition, coal withdrawal, cooperation of low carbon and decarbonization technology, and also the emission reduction in international aviation and maritime activities. But for the coal withdrawal, I think the recent rise in global energy prices may create some uncertainty. For the disagreement, the 1.5-degree target, carbon border adjustment mechanism, and the definition of climate finance will be discussed a lot, but it's hard to reach a consensus. In addition, the increasingly complex international relations may affect future cooperation on climate issues. For the China-Brazil climate cooperation opportunity, I think there are a lot of opportunities. Renewable energy and green value chain. Green value chain are the two main areas that with great potential for cooperation. For the renewable energy, Brazil is rich in water, wind and solar resources. China is increasing its overseas investment in renewable energy. Last year, China invested more renewable energy than fossil fuel. I think China and Brazil have strong complementary advantage in the global energy landscape. For the green value chain, Brazil is a major supplier of Chinese agriculture products, including soybean, beef, and other things. China and Brazil can work together to create a sustainable value chain to protect the rainforest. Finally, I want to end my speech with two sentences. The first one is we should seize the green opportunity for our economy recovery after COVID-19 epidemic. And the second one is it's a huge challenge for all the countries to achieve energy transition and carbon neutrality. We should do more instead of say more. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gu Baihe, for this great presentation on the Chinese case. Now let me introduce Professor Leila da Costa Ferreira, who happens to be my dear supervisor as well. She holds a Bachelor in Ecology from University Júlio de Mesquita Filho, UNESP, a Master's in Sociology and a PhD in Social Sciences, both at University of Campinas, and postdoctorates at the University of Texas and University of York. She's a full professor at Unicamp, and she was a visiting professor at Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Coordinated the Brazil-China study group at the Center for Advanced Studies at Unicamp, and is a lead faculty member of the Earth System Governance Project. She's been working on environmental sociology, sustainability, interdisciplinarity, environmental issues, and social theory. Welcome, Professor Leila. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Fabiana Barbie. Fabiana is my dear friend, and in fact, we made this research together. So when I end my presentation, Fabiana, if you make some comments, it's really nice, okay? So
okay.
Thank you very much. The title of my presentation is One Step Forward and Two Steps Back. Hopes and words about Brazil's participations in COP26, a multi-level perspective. Please, Nicholas. So very, very brief, I use some comments about theoretical and methodological references. First of all, to analyze the climate change, in fact, the climate emergence, I put my attention on cities and use multiple levels, multiple actors, and mainly multiple methods. And the main word of this theoretical and methodological reference is co-productions to analyze public policies in Brazil. So some words about the multi-level and multi-actors governments. Since these issues permeate different interconnected levels of government, you should consider climate change as a multi-level challenge. So most of the literatures on climate policies is occupied by research on global and regional levels of governments, focus on norms, rules, and decision process regarding the international climate regime. Despite these necessary contributions, taking into account of the regional and the local dimensions of the theme is also relevant, since most women activities that contribute to global climate change take place at this level, and at the same time, this level are the most affected by the impacts of these changes. So the literature of these issues identify five key sectors that concentrate the responses to climate change mitigation in the subnational level. First of all, urban development, like territory and planning strategies. Second, built environmental and urban infrastructures like power systems, water, sanitation, and solid waste, and transport and carbon effects. So the next, please, Nicholas. So when you pay attention on the Brazilian case, you can see that the most important Brazilian greenhouse emissions is land use and occupation. It's almost 47%. Agriculture is also very important, almost 24%. Energy, almost 21%. Industrial process, almost 5%. And waste, almost 5.2%. So you can see here, in the local level, the Brazilian local climate policies are isolated initiatives in the national context. By 2016, 70 municipalities had a specific approved legislations related to the climate issues. Most of them were approved from 2009, at the time when the climate issues was a priority in the international political agenda by the time of the Conference of the Parties in Copenhagen. Only Belo Horizonte, in Minas Gerais, Feira de Santana, in Bahia, Palmas, in Tocantins, Recife, in Pernambuco, Rio de Janeiro, in Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, in Fortaleza, and Ceará, have laws that establish municipal climate policy. More recently, we can see the Recife and Fortaleza with some political plans, but we still don't know if they are going to get off the ground. If Fabiana makes some comments later, it's good, okay? So the next, please. On the other hand, it's very important, this slide. In 2017, the National Front of Mayors and the ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and the European Union signed the Global Pact of Mayors for Climate and Energy, an agreement for foster great collaboration between cities worldwide. So more than 70 Brazilian cities are part of this initiative, which sought to build connections between municipalities to increase the supply of financial and enable local actions for the climate and renewable energy. It's considering the large global alliance of cities and the local governments to curb climate change. It's really interesting and it's really important to Brazil. For another level, in the state level, we can see here the Brazilian state with approved climate change policies. Almost 14 states you have here, Amazonia, Tocantins, Piauí, Pernambuco, Paraíba, Bahia, Espírito Santo, Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Paraná, Santa Catarina, and Rio Grande do Sul. It's in the state level. So in the national level, for me and the Brazil in the Fabiana work, we can see the Brazilian response to climate change 4 phases. The first phase is for the climate process, not the environmental politics, but for the climate issues. In the 1992-2002, where you can see here the political institutional structures. In the second phase, the 2003-2008 political scientific agenda, In the third phase, 2009 and 2012, in fact, we began to have a climate policy, and the fourth phase until 2017, the implementation of climate policies. So these phases is really important to Brazil and permeate at the national level and the same time the other levels, the state levels, the local levels. So it's a very, very important to analyze this phase, because nowadays is completely different, unfortunately. So you can see here in my not last, but in finally my presentation, after 2018, in the Curitiba government, there is a great skepticism about global warming, climate change, and concern about risks. So furthermore, it promotes actions against the environment at home in line with the ruralist groups, increasing deforestation in burning rates. It's very, very, very bad situation. The government denies science, so there is no urgency to mitigate climate change, promoting a domestic and foreign policy against the issues. So in my analysis of the importance of emergency climate change foreign policies, we understand that the government is skeptical. Therefore, there are no concerns about these emergencies, nor is the curative one of no future perspective. So you can see in the next slide here, annual deforestation rate in the local Amazon, for example, in 2006 to 2020, it's increasing really. So it's no good situation. And on the other hand, you can see in the last slides, Brazil is not the federal government. Brazil, it's a very big country. We have social movements. We have a lot of actors that promote environmental perspectives, sustainable perspectives. So what the key questions my presentation would like to highlight? First of all, what are the main actors that influence the position of the local level regarding adaptation policies and the ambition set of the Paris Agreement, and what were their interests, incentives, and normative guidelines? Secondly, what domestic international factors, like my colleague that mentioned before, affect the positions of the actors, and what are the main drivers and barriers to increase national ambitions? I'm sorry. Third, what are the capacities of cities in Brazil to make strategic decisions and coordinate and mobilize actions of order according to the national ambition signed in Paris? And finally, what is the potential of transformation partnerships? It's very important, like Gulbai said before me, to increase or transform goals by including the realities of the local and the national risks. That's it, and thank you very much. And I think this panel, or this round table, it's a very important for the debate and for the COP26. Thank you very much, Nicholas and Fabiana and C, for organizing this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Leila, with some very important aspects of the Brazilian case. We can see that the absence of a carbon neutrality plan at national level has been forcing subnational level, both state and municipalities, to take climate actions, also in order to meet Brazilian commitments. But this has proved to be not enough, since the subnational level has no or very little autonomy on relevant sectors regarding mitigation, such as energy and forests and so on. So hopefully we have more space to debate this. After Professor Wang Pu's presentation. So let's welcome Professor Wang Pu. He is currently an associate professor at the Institute of Sciences and Development at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. His research fields include climate and energy policies and sustainable development strategies. His current research projects involve China's carbon emissions trading program and co-benefits between greenhouse gas mitigation and environmental pollution reduction. Professor Wang received his PhD degree from Cornell University in the field of natural resources. He was a postdoctoral fellow at Belfair Center of Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University, where he conducted research on cap and trade systems for greenhouse gas emissions in China and China-US cooperation in climate change policies. Welcome, Professor Wang. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you. We can see your screen, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, perfect.
Okay, sorry. So good morning to our colleagues and students in Brazil, and good evening to our colleagues in China. So I want to thank Fabiana, Nicholas, and Liu Su for the great introduction and for their excellent organization job. So the title of my talk today is Climate Governance in China, the Challenges and Opportunities. And I have to admit that because I had a relatively short time to prepare this talk, so I didn't prepare a very formal presentation. So this is more like an introduction of general information about climate governance in China to facilitate our discussion of this topic. So because the topic of our round table today is about preparing for this year's COPs. So I would like to review China's climate governance in terms of the three most important COPs in history. The first one was the COP3 held in Kyoto, Japan in 1997. The second one, COP15, held in Copenhagen in 2009, and the third one, COP21, held in Paris in 2015. So first, in 1997, Kyoto Protocol was like the first important international agreement on climate change. And at that time, China was a typical developing country. So the per capita GDP was very low and the per capita carbon emission was pretty low. The total emission was not high. So it was like 14% of the global emissions in total. So at that time, China was not the focus of the international community in terms of dealing with climate change. Kyoto Protocol only had mandatory emission reduction requirements for developed countries. And the developing countries, such as China, India, and Brazil, can participate voluntarily. They are called the Annex B countries, and they can voluntarily reduce their emissions, and they can participate in the clean development mechanisms. But because in the early 1990s, China was very isolated in the world for political reasons, and China was excluded from many important international platforms. Climate and environment were like the few fields that China can actively participate. So China took very good advantage of this opportunity to participate in Kyoto Protocol and made some made some pledges to deal with climate change, even though there were no mandatory emission reduction goals. Then in 2009, situation changed significantly. China became the least carbon emission emitter in the world, and the emission was increasing very fast. So the developed countries decided that it is now must be a new international agreement that can replace the Kyoto Protocol and to include the developing countries, including China, India, and Brazil, into the reduction agreements. So in the Copenhagen conference, the developed countries wanted to force China and India and Brazil and other developing countries to accept a mandatory emission reduction agreement. But at that time, China's economy was growing very fast. So the economy doubled every 5 years, and carbon emissions also doubled every 5 years. So it was impossible for China at that time to accept a mandatory emission reduction agreement. So Copenhagen conference was not so successful. And then we came to the Paris Climate Agreement, Paris Climate Conference in 2015, and situation changed significantly again. This time, China voluntarily made pledges to peak its carbon emission by 2030 and to increase its the share of renewable energy into the total energy mix to 20% by 2030. Even after President Trump of the United States declared to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, China still said that we will stick to our pledges made in the Paris Agreement. So what has changed between 2009 to 2015 that China became very active in mitigating climate change? There are 3 key reasons for China to become active in climate mitigation. The first one is international responsibility. China now is the top 1 carbon emitter in the world. It emits more CO2 than the United States and the European Union combined. So as a responsible major country, and as a country that proposed the idea of building a shared future for mankind, so China has to take action in reducing carbon emissions. The second reason is about economic restructuring. So in 2015, China had a very serious problem in economic imbalancing. In the past, China's economic growth was driven by large-scale infrastructure projects and real estate development. But by the time of 2015, China had a very serious overcapacity problem. That means China produces too much steel, too much electricity, and too much cement. And China has to reduce the capacity of this industrial generation and to increase its green industries like renewable energy and high-tech internet, these industries. The third reason is about environmental pollution, particularly air quality and biodiversity. So in around 2015, air pollution became such a serious problem in China's major cities that it became a top political priority for the government. The government had to address air pollution in order to satisfy the people. And as we can see from this picture, carbon pollution and air pollution actually have the same sources. They both come from power generation, heavy industries, transportation, and buildings. So if China wants to cut fossil fuel consumption in these major sectors, it can address both air pollution and climate change. So because of these three reasons, China became increasingly ambitious in mitigating climate change. And China proposed the dual carbon targets, like Professor Gu just said, which is to peak carbon emission by 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. So the challenge is, how can China achieve these important goals? So this graph is from a paper we just published in the journal Environmental Politics. It's about the governance structure and the policy cycle for climate change in China. So this is pretty complex, so I don't want to go to the details of this graph, but I want to point out the important information in this graph. The first one is that China's environmental governance is through a top-down approach. So the central government agencies make plans and ask the lower governments, the provinces, the cities, to implement these plans, and they have to achieve these targets. If the lower governments cannot achieve this, fail to achieve these targets, then the higher level government has the authority to evaluate them and to punish them. So because of this top-down accountability system, China is able to make national plans and divide these national plans to provinces and cities and ensure that these targets are achieved. So it's actually different from the United States and different from Brazil, as Professor Leila just said. The second is that China does not have party politics. So that means China does not have political polarization like the United States. So that means we can make relatively long-term, more stable climate policies. So for these reasons, some people argue that the Chinese model is actually, there are many advantages for the Chinese model to address climate change because of top-down approach and because of the absence of the political polarization. That being said, that does not mean climate governance in China does not have challenges. So the first one I want to point out is that, as Professor Gu just said, China has very serious imbalances in regional development. So in this map, this map is about the carbon emission per capita in provinces in China. And we can roughly divide the provinces into three categories. The first category is these low emission, high income provinces. They are like the post-industrial countries in Western Europe and in the United States. They don't have a lot of heavy industries and they have relatively low carbon emissions and their economy is grew pretty well. The second group is these high emission, middle income provinces. They have a lot of heavy industries and they have very high carbon emissions, and they are currently the target of China's climate policies. They have to reduce a lot of steel production, electricity generation, and they suffer a lot from economic losses and from unemployment. But this is like a necessary suffering to transition to a green economy. And the most tricky part is these low emission, low income provinces in the southwest corner of China. And Yunnan province, Kunming, is in this corner. So these provinces do not have a lot of heavy industries, but their per capita income is quite low. That means they will need to build a lot of infrastructure, a lot of real estate projects in order to raise their standard of living. And the most important part is that this part has China's highest biodiversity because Kunming is in this province. And that means there will be significant trade-off in these provinces in the future between economic development, addressing climate change, and protect biodiversity. So this slide also shows these trade-offs. So this is the different types of power generation in China. So the black dots are coal-fired power plants. they are the dominant source of power generation in China and dominant source of CO2 emission in China. The green dots are the hydropower. They are mostly concentrated in the southwest provinces. The green dots are wind power, and the red dots are solar power. They are mostly in northern China, in the deserts in very remote areas. Currently, the wind and solar energy do not have big impact on biodiversity because they are in deserts and in very dry regions. But China wants to significantly expand its solar and wind capacity to the east and to the south. By 2030, China wants to build 2,000 gigawatt capacity for wind and solar power. And that means a lot of wind and solar farms will be built in the southwestern provinces where biodiversity level is very high. So this will also be a very important trade-off because the solar and wind will take a lot of land. They will need to clear a large piece of land where a lot of endangered species are located. So this will have very significant trade-off between renewable energy and biodiversity. I think these are the topics that we need to focus on in our future research between these two key topics. So that's my very brief and very general introduction of China's climate governance, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Wang Bu, for this insightful presentation on the Chinese case. We have some little space for a discussion here since Professor Gu Baihe has to leave in a few minutes. So we can open for the audience. Nicholas C, I don't know, they are my organization partners. I think we can open, yes, for a quick round of questions from the audience. So if you prefer to write on the chat, we can also translate for the speakers. Or if you want to open your microphone, please feel comfortable to ask the questions, so we can have this. And then we'll move to the second part, talking about biodiversity. Well, while you are thinking about the questions, I have one myself for Professor Wang Bu and Professor Gu Baihe. More on the perspective of the existing mitigation efforts in China. In your perspective, are these efforts enough to achieve this target, this carbon neutrality in 2060? What are significant moves that need to happen for this to be achieved? Yes, I think this question is because we really want to be optimistic since our current scenario here is really complicated right now. So I guess our perspective is very positive when we look at the Chinese scenario. Yes. So I just was wondering if you have the same perspective. Okay, I will leave now the floor to the audience.
So sorry, I just lost my connection, and I heard I heard part of your question, but I lost my connection for a minute. So did Professor Gu Baihe just respond to your question?
Yeah. I want to declare one thing. For a lot of people, they think that China has a powerful central government. So always they will think, oh, okay, President Xi said we will achieve the carbon peaking and the carbon neutrality goals, and all the local governments and enterprise will strive to do their best to achieve their goals. But in fact, from my opinion, it's not the true thing. I have go a lot of local provinces and some provinces and cities. They usually they how to say that they prefer to announce a target to meet the central government's goals, but they will say the broader cities and broader provinces activities, yeah, then they will take act. Just like what I say for the 1+N policy system, because none of them have been released. So the local government don't know what to do. So for the foreigners, you will say, yeah, Chinese have a great targets, but in fact, in my opinion, it's difficult. It's difficult. Yes. I'm sorry. That's my answer.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We also have Professor Carlos Joly and Professor Renan Zhu raised their hands. I'm sorry, I didn't see who raised the first. So please, you can open and ask your questions.
Carlos, actually, so I'll go second.
Okay. Okay, Professor Joly.
Well, thank you, Professor Zhu, for the presentation. I thought that in this last map that you presented, the wind generation of energy has been concentrated in areas that are drier and poorer in terms of biodiversity. But you are planning to expand that to areas that are richer in biodiversity. Can you foresee a problem in terms of a shock between biodiversity and implementation of these wind power energy generators?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Joly, for your question. So actually, your question is actually the topic of our research project that we are now working on. So these southwestern provinces are making very ambitious plans to expand wind and solar power. And they are, so they plan to clear large pieces of land for these wind farms and for these solar farms. And that actually will have a very big impact on biodiversity. So Yunnan is like, Yunnan's climate is kind of similar to Brazil, to the Amazons. So very high, extremely high biodiversity and a lot of endangered species. So I think after our modeling and after our field work, it's very likely that we will find it is not a very good idea to build large-scale commercial wind and solar farms in these provinces. It is much better for China to build these wind and solar farms in the northern provinces. So even if China wants to address climate change and want to significantly expand the solar and wind capacity, it is important to choose the right place and to minimize the impacts on biodiversity and on other environmental issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Professor Anna Zhu, please.
Yeah, my question is for Professor Gubai about at the beginning of your presentation, you noted this transition from the MEE to the NDRC, for who is responsible for the carbon targets, the leading organization for that, how that shifted. And I wanted to know what that implications are of that shift from the Ministry of Ecology and Environment to the NDRC. What is that? Would you consider that a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, what are the implications of that? Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm also interested in knowing that.
Thank you for your questions. I'll try to give an answer. In fact, in 2018, as you know, the climate department transferred from NDRC to MEE, and after maybe two or 3 years, they found that carbon emission reduction is not so much like the environmental production. It refers to all the economy activities. For example, energy saving and energy mix restructuring, and also the industrial structure, restructure the industrial sector, and all this approach, all these pathways is the MEE cannot coordinate all the other sectors. In China, only NDRC can do the coordinated and the overall things. So the climate departments moved from MEE to NDRC. Yeah.
So when was that switch back then from MEE to NDRC? I'm sorry, you said in 2018 it switched from, they switched it to MEE.
Mm-hmm. You mean the time when it transferred from MEE to NDRC?
Yeah.
In fact, the department has not transferred from MEE to NDRC. Only the responsibilities.
Yeah. When did that happen?
The May of this year.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So that's recent. Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much.
It's okay. You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, we were discussing here that maybe we can concentrate the other questions for the end of the discussion. We still have 2 more presentations on biodiversity, and I'm sure we'll have some more questions regarding the synergies among these between these 2 important agendas. So if you all agree, we'll move on to the second part to hear about biodiversity in Brazil and China. And I want to thank again Professors Gu Baihe, Professor Leila da Costa Ferreira, and Professor Wan Pu for the very important and insightful presentations. So let me introduce Professor Carlos Joly, who was also my co-supervisor in my PhD. He's a full professor in plant ecology at Unicamp. He is the member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences and the IPBES Task Force on Capacity Building. He graduated in biology from the University of São Paulo, holds a master's in plant biology from Unicamp, a PhD in plant ecophysiology from the University of St. Andrews, Scotland, and a postdoc from the University of Bern, Switzerland. He works in the areas of plant ecophysiology and biodiversity conservation. Professor Joly has over 100 journal articles and 12 books published, and supervised over 40 master's and doctoral theses. He is the main mentor of the Biota FAPESP program and its journal, Biota Neotropica, for which he's been awarded twice with the Henry Ford Conservation Initiative. He has experience both in the state and the federal government. For his achievements, he received several prizes. At the IPBES, he was co-chair of the Multidisciplinary Panel of Experts and is currently the head of the Brazilian Platform of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Welcome, Professor Joly. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicholas and Fabiana, for inviting me for this very interesting roundtable of discussion in the brink of sequences of conference of parties. The biodiversity one started Monday, although almost nobody knows it. And the climate one will start by the end of the month. I don't know. I still think that the best option would be to divide it like the biodiversity one in a presential, having a presential phase later on. But nevertheless, it will be starting. I'll be talking about the challenges for Brazil in terms of biodiversity. If I may, I'll try to share my screen. So this is the topic of my talk. And it's always good to have in mind that when it comes to biodiversity, Brazil is on the top of the rank. Doesn't matter if you're considering plants or if you're considering vertebrates. And we also have a very diverse ethnic composition that is at least 15,000 years old, perhaps more, but that's what we have in the record. And this started much longer before the European arrived here, but it went on with the arrival of the Europeans, because then we have also the influence of the African cultures, and then we had the influence of various European groups, and later on of Japanese and Chinese and Arabians that are more recent here. So we kept always this high diversity in terms of ethnic origins and cultures. And we had until 1990, I think that the main challenge in Brazil in terms of biodiversity was to transform this equation. And we had an enormous amount of data and very little drops of understanding, and even less of sustainable use. So then we started national and regional large programs on biodiversity research. The first one to start was the Biota program. That is a program that is supported by the State of São Paulo Research Foundation. It was established in 1999 as a 10 years program for biodiversity research. Then later on, we had the PPBio. PPBio is a program that was established by the Ministry of Science and Technology. It started in the Amazon region, was very strong in the Amazon region, and then it had a second branch on the more drier areas of Caatinga. This is in the northeast of Brazil. Then we had this long-term ecological studies, PELD, that again is from the Ministry of Science and Technology, and there are sites that has been selected where you have long-term research. Long-term now being more than 25 years of research in some of these spots. And then by the end of 2009, 2010, FAPESP decided to give another 10 years for the Biota program. And this time, the program was starting to organize the information that was obtained during the first phase. I mean, the presence, absence of organisms around the state or around the different biomes in Brazil, and started to try to understand the functioning of forests and functioning of water environments. So it moved on from this biodiversity discovery to a better understanding of the functioning of those systems. So nowadays, we are living the phase where we are starting to synthesize information in terms of biodiversity and ecosystem services. This is Symbiosis. This is also a program from the Ministry of Science and Technology, and it aims to integrate information that's been raised along those 20 years, previous 20 years, on some of synthesis that can be of use or can synthesize a theoretical aspect or can synthesize advances in knowledge in terms of biodiversity and ecosystem services. We reached the stage where we know quite a lot about biodiversity. Obviously, there is an enormous amount to be discovered, but we know the sufficient about biodiversity to understand how this system functions, to understand how changes like land use changes, climate change, introduction of invasive species will impact these ecosystems. So now we are in a phase where we think we can have a better science policy interface, i.e. to use the best knowledge available to support the creation or improvement of the legal framework for biodiversity, conservation, restoration, and sustainable use. And this is what the stage that we are now. We had a very good example of that at the international level when IPBES was established in 2012, and it started to synthesize the information available, producing first reports, thematic reports. The first one was on pollination and food production. The second one was on modeling and scenarios. And eventually it came to a geographic definition. So we had one that was looking at the Americas considering from Alaska to Patagonia. And then in 2019, we had the first global report or assessment in terms of biodiversity and ecosystem service. And all this has been showing that we've been destroying biodiversity in a very strong way, and that we are losing some of the services that are essential for human well-being. The experience and the model that was used by IPBES and the amount of Brazilian researchers that were involved in the various reports, assessments, task forces of IPBES led us to establish in 2015 the Brazilian Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So this is a summary of the way we look at the work of the platform. So we synthesize knowledge. We are sort of a broker organization where we synthesize the best knowledge. Doesn't matter if the knowledge comes from science, if it comes from traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge. So you use all the knowledge available and you produce the best advice possible in terms of biodiversity, conservation, and sustainable use for governments, for the private sector, for the media, for NGOs. So it's a link. So we've been working on that when we produced the first Brazilian assessment on biodiversity and ecosystem services in 2018. And together with that, we produced another 4 topic reports, 1 report on biodiversity and climate, 1 report on biodiversity and water, 1 on restoration, and 1 on pollination and food production. So by the end of 2018, we were prepared to discuss and to sit with governmental representatives from different ministries to try to use all the information that's been gathered to improve the legal framework. But then disasters came. And from 2019, we rapidly changed from a country that was really engaged in biodiversity protection, was engaged in the climate protection, to a country that is burning forests, is burning areas like the waterlands, the watershed of the Pantanal, as we know, having very large accidents with oil in the sea. So in terms of environment, we lost completely the possibility of dialoguing with the federal government in terms of using the knowledge accumulated in those reports prepared over 4 years to improve our legal framework. So I can say that at the federal level, our big challenge is to survive. If we reach 1st of January 2023, we may recover or start a process to recover all the damage that has been made to the environment. But we have other, in our structure, we have the federal government, we have the state governments, and we've been working with the state government in a new development of the Biota program. We established last year a synthesis center for analysis and synthesis of nature-based solutions in partnership with some State of São Paulo secretaries, Secretary of Environment and Health, together with NGOs. And the idea here is to have 5 sub-projects that will be focused on solving problems for these secretaries. So it's applied for the solution of problem. Use all the information that has been generated by the Biota, by the other programs that I've mentioned, and try to focus on solving problems. These are problems that are urban problems. These are problems that are of how to protect the pollinators, have a state policy for pollinators, since we've estimated in our assessment that pollination produces annually about $12 billion in terms of commodities that are exported by Brazil. So it's not a small service, it's a very important part of our exportation base. And we want to have policies that protect pollinators. So one of the big things that we are discussing with the state government is we had a new Brazilian forest code approved in 2012. And this code gives the states the possibility of tailoring the implementation, i.e., you can be more restrict in your state regulation than what is established in the federal forest code. So the forest code is the limit. You cannot be more flexible than it's in the forest code, but you can be more strict. And that's what we want here in the state of São Paulo. And we've been discussing this. We've been working at 2 working groups involved in the research people and people from the State Secretary of Agriculture and State Secretary of Environment discussing this implementation. We want to have the restoration of the permanent protected areas surrounding rivers. This is already established and it will happen. And there is a lot of discussion about what we call the legal reserve. This is a part of the areas, private owners of large areas for cultivation or for cattle ranching. They have to keep 20% of the area as natural vegetation. It can be exploited, but it cannot be cut and destroyed or burned or something like that. So some of the areas here in the state of São Paulo don't have these areas for compensation, and we are discussing a market for that and how to regulate that market. That's the main objective now. Obviously, we cannot not mention what's happening in Kunming, that we are having this first part of the COP15 of the biodiversity, where there are a lot of things that are in the table for discussing. We've been working quite a lot on this third meeting that is promoting synergistic actions for biodiversity, climate, land, and oceans. And yesterday, there was a round table for the high-level segment that is in Kunming, discussing exactly that. And we hope that this will come out with very good indications. Unfortunately, Brazil is one of the countries that doesn't want to discuss climate change together with biodiversity, or the impacts of climate change in biodiversity. These are some of the points that the scientific community and the private sector have been working for the last 2.5 years in terms of suggestions to have as a result of the COP15. And I end here my presentation. Thank you, Xi.
Thank you very much, Professor Julie, for this great presentation on the Brazilian case. Well, last but not least, let me introduce Professor Zhang Yan. She holds a doctoral degree of law and is currently an associate professor at the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences, CAS. She's also a director of the China Science and Technology Law Research Association, a director of China Intellectual Property Research Association, and an expert on the legal consulting service platform of CAS. She's mainly engaged in research on science and technology law, intellectual property law, and administrative law. She has presided over the completion of more than 10 research projects, including national Chinese projects and provincial and ministerial projects, and has participated in nearly 20 research projects, including major ones with the Chinese Social Science Fund and the Natural Science Foundation of China. She has published dozens of academic papers in domestic and foreign journals, such as Legal and Business Studies, Law Forum, Wuhan University Journal, International Journal of Medical Informatics, and others. Welcome, Professor Zhang. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor Fabiana, for your generous introduction. And it's really a great pleasure for me to be here. I am Yan from the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences, and Zhang is my family name. Today, the title of my topic today is Biodiversity as a legal issue, perspectives from China. Here is the outline of my topic today. And first, let's come to the biodiversity issue in China. As we all know, biodiversity is our life support system, and it is the foundation for sustainable economic development. And China is one of the first countries to sign the Convention on biological diversity. And also, China is one of the countries where biodiversity is most seriously threatened. Today, just like in most countries around the world, biodiversity in China is threatened by need, greed, and overuse. Here, let's have a look at this picture. Here we can see China's population's change in recent years. This is the national census of China's population. In the year 2020, China's population topped 1.41 billion, spiking the country's enormous demand for land, water, food, and other resources. And the situation is especially serious in remote rural areas, which are usually economically underdeveloped. In those remote rural areas, farmers, fishermen take over, for example, forest, wetlands, or coastlands as they need more land and energy to support themselves and their family members. To meet their basic needs, large sums of people just taking out actions against the biodiversity protection. And when these habitats disappear, species die and biodiversity suffers. Here, I would like to take Chinese coastal wetlands as an example. This is a picture of Chinese coastal wetlands. From this picture, we can see that over-aquaculture and fishing make Chinese coastal wetlands increasingly burdened. And also in a lot of places, the coastal wetlands are shrinking because of various factors. Many factors have aggravated the biodiversity crisis in China, such as the environmental pollution, climate change and natural disasters, habitat destruction, biological invention, and wildlife trade. As to climate change and natural disasters, we know in recent years, China has been suffering from droughts, floods, earthquakes, etc. And the changing weather patterns, extreme weathers, and natural disasters are causing wildlife habitats to disappear. When those wildlife habitats disappear, the species there will die, and which will bring negative effect on the biodiversity protection in those areas. Here, I would like to take Zhang Jiuzhaigou as an example. Here are the pictures of Jiuzhaigou. From these pictures, we can be impressed by the beautiful natural scenery there. Jiuzhaigou is in the northwestern Sichuan province, and it is a World Natural Heritage. Also, it is one of the most famous national key scenic spots in China, and it is one of the few national 5A level tourist attractions in China. For a long time, China's government established a national nature reserve here, and it is also a national geological park. This place enjoys high reputation amongst tourists. It has been regarded as the wonderland on earth. So this is really a very beautiful place. And also, Jiuzhaigou is very famous for its rich biodiversity and outstanding species rarity. It has extremely high ecological protection value and scientific research value. Here are some species of animals. Here are some kinds of plant resources, pictures of such plant resources. According to the official report, Jiuzhaigou Natural Reserve has a forest coverage rate of over 80%. And there are 38 species of wine and valuable Chinese medicines. And there are 74 national protected rare plants and 18 national protected animals. And there are more than 100 species of terrestrial vertebrates in this area. So this place is really a good place with wonderful biodiversity. However, if we have a look at these two pictures, it might be hard for us to believe that these are pictures of the same place. The picture on the left was taken before the Jiuzhaigou earthquake in August 2017. And the picture on the right was taken just after the Jiuzhaigou earthquake. From the comparison of these era images of Jiuzhaigou, we can know that earthquake has greatly destructed almost the geological appearance of such a place, and it's totally changed the habitats of this place. And also the species which depends such habitats for living has been greatly affected. Then let's come to the Chinese policies and legislations on biodiversity protection. For decades, China has successfully formulated and revised more than 50 laws and regulations, as well as various policies related to biodiversity protection. We have such as the law on environment protection, the law on the wild animals conservation, the law on fishing, and the regulations on wild plants protection. Also, we have such policies related to biodiversity protection. For example, this is the National Biodiversity Conservation Strategy and the Action Plan. And this is the Action Plan of Shandong Province. Those laws and regulations may include laws and regulations, administrative regulations, and government's rules, different kinds of levels of regulations. The continuous improvement of the policy and the legal system in China just provides the necessary support and the guarantee for the protection of biodiversity. To sum up, China's biodiversity laws and legislations and policies mainly involve the following aspects, such as the biosecurity risk prevention, the protection of biological habitats, the protection of biological species resources, the prevention of allied species invasion, also the protection of ecosystems, etc. And if I have a look at the recent progress of Chinese legislation and the policy on the biodiversity conservation, we may find that they are really great progress. First, let's have a look at the biosafety law. Biosafety law was passed on October 17th, 2020. It was a law passed by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of the People's Republic of China. This law came into force on April 15th, 2020. The biosafety law, as to the content of biosafety law, it just includes the principles of risk prevention and the improvement of a biosafety guarantee system and the promotion about to the standardized utilization of biological resources and the promotion of the healthy development of biotechnology. Also about the participation in international affairs and calling for the cooperation with countries around the world on biodiversity conservation. And Chinese government paid special attention to the implementation of biosafety law. Here is a symposium held on April 1st, 2021. And Mr. Li Zhanshu presented a speech at the symposium. Li Zhanshu is the member of the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee. And the biosafety law the implementation of biosafety law has been regarded as a milestone in Chinese legal governance on biodiversity conservation. But this law is a basic, comprehensive, systematic, and commanding law in the field of biosafety. Also, just a few days ago, on October 8th, 2021, a white paper on China's biodiversity conservation was issued by the Information Office of the State Council, the Cabinet. This white paper stresses the importance of biodiversity conservation in China, and it expressed China's concept of harmonious coexistence between man and nature, and it expressed China's firm determination on the continuous improvement of the effectiveness of biodiversity conservation, and China's determination on biodiversity governance capabilities enhancement, etc. And this Mr. Zhao Yingming, Vice Minister of the Ministry of Economy and the Environment, presented a speech at a conference. He just stated the main content of such a white paper and stated the background of formulating of such a white paper, and also he states Chinese plan for further improvement on biodiversity conservation in the coming 10 years. Then let's come to China's achievements in protecting biodiversity. As we said just now, Chinese government paid special attention to the biodiversity conservation, and a lot of laws and regulations was passed to guarantee the biodiversity protection in China. Then let's come to the progress China has achieved in recent days. First is the protection of biological habitats in China. And let's have a look at these two pictures. This is the distribution of priority areas for biodiversity conservation in China. From this picture, we can know that China has identified 2.763 million square kilometers of biodiversity conservation land priority areas. And these land priority areas accounts for about 28.8% of the land area. And then we might wonder why Chinese government just made such a decision. It is because that 90% of the terrestrial natural ecosystem types and 89% of the national key protected wild animals and plant species, and the most important natural relics can be effectively protected in those natural reserves. And also another progress is the protection of biological species in China. Here is a report about the Chinese anti-smuggling. Huangpu Custom Anti-Smuggling Bureau in Guangdong City investigated and handled the 117 smuggling case. And this case is closely related with Ivory. In this case, about more than 20 criminals were caught. And also, this case, the Ivory closely related with this case was amounted to about 20 tons. So from this case, we can know that China strengthens law enforcement and severely cracks down on smuggling of rare and endangered wildlife. And here we can know China has taken active participation in global environment governance from the initiative to establish the Belt and Road Green Development International Alliance to launching environmental protection cooperation with countries around the world, or to committing to achieve the time from carbon peak to carbon neutrality. China demonstrates its firm determination to be a responsible country to promote biodiversity protection. And also China has taken actions to provide assistance to those developing countries. Here is the report of China's assistance to Madagascar. This is the project of Madagascar's assistance project. China just carried out international humanitarian assistance and to take effective actions to help those countries to protect their ecosystems. And also Chinese enterprises took active measures to take part in those the biodiversity protection. Here are reports of Chinese enterprises' efforts in related to biodiversity protection. And also NGOs' participation in biodiversity protection was also reported in different areas. Here I should like to choose this one. This is a case of in Zhejiang City, and this is the first public interest litigation in Zhejiang City. And in this case, Beijing's source enthusiastic environment research was the plaintiff, and the Zhejiang Mining and the Metallurgy Company was the defendant. And also Zhejiang Environment Protection Bureau and the local government were the third parties. This case is about the environment pollution because of these companies' emission of waste water. So it caused great damage to the local environment. And finally, this case ended by the Zhejiang Mining and Metallurgy Company decided to pay about 30 million for the environmental restoration. And then for a shared future for all life on Earth, how about China's challenges and choices? China still faces serious challenges when it comes to the biodiversity protection, such as how to balance the conflicts between economic development and the biodiversity protection. how to guarantee the basic living of the residents of the nature reserves and ensure that they can benefit from biodiversity conservation. And what's more, how to attract more social forces to participate in biodiversity conservation. And also for a shared future for all life on Earth, China, I just put forward some suggestions such as cooperation in global environment governance and biodiversity protection is urgently needed. And effective measures should be taken for the balance of conservation and utilization of the biodiversity. And what's most important, a reasonable benefit sharing system should be established. To sum up, this is really a critical moment full of challenges and opportunities. So biodiversity protection is not an issue that only affects one country or a few countries. It affects almost everyone and every country in the world. So the connective actions from all countries and people from all walks of life are urgently needed for a better, for a shared future for all life on Earth. That's all for my presentation today. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang, for this great presentation on the Chinese case. I guess all the presentations showed that despite the differences between Brazil and China, both countries face several challenges regarding climate change and biodiversity protection. So we have some time now for the debate. We are going to collect questions from the audience. I guess there is one question from the first part, from two questions actually, yes. One from Bruna Moreira. I'm not sure if she's still here.
Might not be, but she let me know about her question about international climate responsibility, which is actually an issue that I'm also interested in. So this is maybe an interesting overlap. And since we are going to be uploading this presentation or the discussion onto our YouTube channel, I hope Bruna is watching this later to hear her response to the question. So basically, China and Brazil as very biodiverse, mega diverse countries in the world are really an important part in solving global problems concerning both climate change and the biodiversity, the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis that we're facing right now. So it's very interesting to see all of those different perspectives in terms of both the science policy interface that Professor Joly talked about and the legal aspects that are very important and the very important basis to tackle those changes. And this overlaps nicely in terms of environmental sociological theory, that in how those challenges do have to be addressed on several levels, on multiple levels, and always involve not only the political sphere or not only the economic sphere and not only science to resolve those problems, but always a certain type of cooperation. So when we engage in a conversation like this between Brazil and China, where we have very different political systems, very different social systems, where the engagement of actors works in a very different way, I think there are lots of probably very basic questions that we have to get out of the way first to kind of understand how we can have a dialogue on them, just like Professor Gu proposed a couple of ideas already on where we can have our dialogue. And I think Professor Wang's contribution in terms of how China has been working on them has been a great basis, I think, for us to understand which questions to ask and which cooperation we can tackle onwards. So yeah, leading to the question that Bruna asked, it's quite simple, I would say, in the interpretation, which is why has China been embracing biodiversity, and since when has this entered on the agenda? Why is biodiversity important? I've been to Zhoujiago myself, so I was very happy to see you bringing up that example, and that might be an interesting case to exemplify this. But so why and how has or since when has China been embracing biodiversity conservation as an important issue?
Okay, thank you, Nicholas. I guess we can collect maybe a couple more questions and then bring them back to the speakers. And then if we have time, we'll make another round. I'm afraid not, but we also had one question left from the first part about the importance of agricultural regions for the energy transition. It's a bit broad, but it's from Gisela Pires do Rio. She's here if she wants to say something about it. Otherwise, we can maybe collect one or two more questions and then go back to the speakers.
So the question is concerning the importance of agricultural areas in terms of the energy transition. Is that correct, Gisela?
Yes, I guess that's
okay.
What we had here.
Yes. Okay. She just wrote me a yes here.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So if we have no more questions in this first round, we can get back to the speakers. Please feel free, maybe in the order, if you feel comfortable. Professor Wang, I guess Professor Lila had to leave for another meeting too. So please. Okay.
I will address the second question about the trade-offs between agriculture and renewable energy. So there are two types of trade-offs. The first one is about bioenergy. So maybe in the past 10 to 15 years, some people argue that bioenergy is really important to reduce carbon emissions and to replace fossil fuels, particularly bioenergy plus CCS, carbon capturing and storage, which is a negative emission technology, which can not only emit net zero energy, but can actually sequestrate CO2 from the atmosphere. But the problem is that bioenergy, at least the current generation bioenergy, takes a lot of agricultural land, and that will have a big impact on agriculture, on food price, and on food safety, particularly for developing countries. And the second type of trade-off is what I just said in my presentation. It's the land use impact of solar and wind energy. So wind and solar are like zero emission energy sources. That's great. But the problem is that they are much more spatially extensive compared to conventional energies like coal-fired power plants, which takes a relatively small piece of land. But if you want to build a solar farm that's equivalent to a coal-fired power plant, that takes maybe 1,000 times more land. So that's I think that's a big problem. It's a very important research question, but it does not mean that we cannot find solutions. As I said, the siting of wind and solar farms are extremely important. You want to build these farms in land that has relatively small biodiversity impacts and relatively small impacts on agriculture. And that means you also need infrastructure for transmission and for the integration of renewable energy into the electricity grids. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Joly, please.
Yeah, I would like to pose a question to Professor Zhang. do you think that it would be a good way for the biodiversity COP to go on the same way as the climate COP went in Paris, i.e. that you have national defined contributions in terms of biodiversity protection, and then you put this, each country will present their commitment, and then you put this all together and produce a global commitment. Do you think that this would be a strategy that would work for biodiversity, or climate is completely different, so it's working for climate, but it wouldn't work for biodiversity?
Oh, thank you. That's really a good question. In my opinion, the biodiversity protection it's not the task of within one country, because it is deeply people around the world and all countries across the world are closely related. So a joint commitment may be a good way to deal some things, but for different countries, they might have their own interests. So it might be hard to negotiate and to find a strategy that most countries might agree. So that is what we're doing now. The conference, you know, it's just to provide a good place for negotiation, and we can understand that that's the difference between the developed countries and the developing countries in the biodiversity protection. The difference is quite great, because you know, different country has its own interest. So for those developed countries, maybe they enjoy the consumption provided by the forest, the oceans, and the other natural resources. And for the developing countries, they might spend great energy to protect the forest, the oceans in their countries. So that's why we say that the developed countries should take more responsibility and to help the biodiversity, the conservation in those developing countries. We know that some very important natural reserves are located in developing countries, especially the forests. So, in those developing countries, people might struggle to make a living to support themselves and their family members. But maybe because of their poor conditions, because they didn't have enough skills to make a living, to achieve more money. So deforestation, they might choose deforestation as a quick way to make a living. So I think it might be difficult for joint commitment around the world, but we should have a try, because I think the developed countries may realize the great influence of the loss of biodiversity in those developing countries. So they should take their responsibilities. That's my opinion. Thank you, Johnny. And also, I would like to take this chance to ask you a question. From your introduction, we know that Brazil is quite rich in wildlife species. So I noticed that just a few days ago, Brazilian Ministry of Environment has issued an important decree on establishing wildlife rescue plan. So I just want to know how about effective measures of Brazil just on the wildlife rescue and wildlife protection, and how did this country balance the natural resources utilization and natural resources protection?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Obviously, it would be much cheaper to conserve and to preserve the habitats of animals in general, so that you wouldn't need a plan or a policy to rescue those species. But since this is not the case, and the forest is being cut and deforestation is very high, I think these centers that are already working and they need more money to, they're receiving animals that are has been dislocated from their habitats, either by burning or by hunting or by any kind of disturbance. And usually they are very weak and needing help and support to be strong enough to be released again. So this is the major work they are doing, and it's a very good work. But what we are aiming to go further is that some of the center must also start reproduction of these animals. And we have very few in Brazil that are doing that. You have one very good one in the zoological in São Paulo city, where they work with the reproduction of wild cats. There are several species, and they've been managing very good results in that. And you need this breeding. Otherwise, for some regions, the populations are already so low and so genetically similar that it's very difficult to preserve them. So I think that this initiative is a good one. But as I said in the beginning, it would be much cheaper, much better if we would preserve the habitats and keep those animals, their habitats. I think there are various studies that show that we don't need to convert more forest to agriculture. We can improve the production by area in the agriculture and keep growing in terms of the production without needing to destroy new pieces of forest. So the situation we are living now, it's very harmful for the environment. It's very, very harmful for the people living in the Amazon, for the traditional communities, but they are dislocated by these people that come from other regions and just start burning and bringing down the forest. And for biodiversity and climate is a disaster. I mean, we could have much a win-win situation where you keep the forest, you keep the people using the forest, and you keep the animals there, so without having to have special plans for protecting them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. I think we will be hearing and seeing a lot more news about those topics towards the end of the week, when we hopefully hear and see something about the 30 by 30 goal that I think you were hinting at, Professor Joly.
Yeah.
We will see if that will come about at the end.
And the other important goal that Zhang mentioned in her talk also is that we need to get a real good deal for sharing the benefits of using biodiversity and traditional knowledge. Nagoya Protocol is a very good main road, but there is still a lot of gray areas in the protocol that need to be clarified, and clarified in a way that it will protect traditional knowledge holders and ensure their participation, and protect the countries holders of biodiversity, the mega diverse countries, mainly in terms of the benefits that arise from using the biodiversity. And this will really be the big issue in discussion, in my opinion.
benefit sharing. That is something that can only be achieved really in cooperation and mutual agreement on the importance of the issues. Okay, I think we are getting towards the end of our discussion, unfortunately, even though I think both of the blocks should have been events on their own, because they deserve a lot more discussion, especially the biodiversity topic that those people of us who are looking at the climate issue only understand, at least speaking for my side, very superficially. And both topics need to be discussed more together, because there's just so much space to expand on those discussions. We would like to thank all of you for your great participation, for your super interesting presentations, and hope that this will just be the beginning of more and longer discussions on exactly those issues. I hope in a couple of months, maybe when the second round of COP15 in Kunming will take place in person, I hope we will have a second round of discussions to see how well everyone has prepared and how well the goals have been delivered. We would like to thank, of course, first of all, our dear colleagues and participants from the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the University of Cass for their time and dedication to this event. The University of Campinas, of course, both the Institute of Biology, where Professor Jolie is from, and the Center for Environmental Studies and Research, where we studied, and the Institute of Philosophy that Liu Si has been recently formed by our Brazilian Chinese connection that we have here. And of course, the Research Foundation of the State of São Paulo that finances quite some of our research. Very important in those times of calamity in research, very unfortunately. And we hope that this event has brought about some interest of yours in the other topic, in case you are researching biodiversity, to look a little bit more towards the corridor of climate. And for us, for the people who are researching climate policy, to look a little bit more into the important work that is happening on the biodiversity side of things, because in the end, all of this is a connected debate that we hope to advance on a little more. So thank you all very much, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.